All right, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily Martin. I am a monitoring specialist with the ODF Water Quality and Monitoring Unit. So we'll get this Compliance Monitoring Program Committee meeting started. Nice to see everybody. All right, so first off, just a bit about what we're going to be going through today on our agenda. We're going to start off with riparian pilot study updates. Then we're going to go into the roads and steep slopes pilot methods review. And then the compliance monitoring program symposium takeaways. And then looking through our 2026 meeting schedule, and then what we're going to do at our next meeting. So this slide might be a little familiar. I did remove one of the earlier steps, which was basically just planning to reach out to our landowners and our stewardship foresters to gain access for the for our surveying of our units for our riparian pilot study. So last time we talked, we were at the prepare site packets and schedule data collection kind of step of things. And now that starting in late September, we began our data collection. So going out and looking at our riparian buffers widths at various areas. And after that, we will be sending the data after we've input it into Excel and also double checked it to MHE. And just a reminder, this is a pilot study. It's more focused on methods than anything, takeaways for what we might have learned and how we can improve the methods before going into a larger scale study. So although we'll probably have, some information about compliance rates, that's not the goal of our study when we send it to MHE. All right, so what are we doing right now? So before we go onto any of our sites, like right before our access, we always make sure to contact the landowner if they have expressed in the form we sent them that they would like to know when we plan to go to their land. We contact them via email about 1 week in advance. We also try to contact the relevant stewardship forester about 1 week in advance as well, letting them know when the data collection is scheduled and that we've let the landowner know. And we have invited them to attend, and we ask them for intel on things like the best access route or if there's anything we should be looking out for to or within the site. So just a bit of information about what our study population looks like. So, when we selected our sites, we looked at a population of notifications that were completed in 2024, were a harvest type 1 to 3 clear cut, and included a riparian management area, RMA. Then we randomized and drew the desired sample size. Just something to keep in mind before I go through our 4 specific types of sites. Since these rules are fairly new, we didn't have a large enough sample population to even get our goal of 5 sites for our pilot. So that's why we have 4 sites. It's what was available to us. The overdraw just shows how many total sites were drawn from our random selection. Our overdraw, kind of like with our reforestation study. As you may notice, for the SFO minimums, small forest owner minimum, we had an overdraw of 29. That's our largest overdraw because we were thinking about how in the past we've had lower response rates. So we needed to be able to go through more landowners. I think for we went all the way through to number 13 on our priority list of selection before we got our 5 for that one. Versus with our Eastern Oregon one, we selected 8, and we got the first 5 that were not that were correct for our study. Because sometimes we also have to eliminate sites, which is why we also have the overdraw. Because maybe once we get there, we realize that when there's boots on the grounds, they're actually not the right kind of site that we're looking for. So we have, for our 4 types, we have 2 types in Western Oregon. We have that SFO minimum and our Well, actually, we have three. And then we have our standard. We have both fish and non-fish streams. And then for Eastern Oregon, we just have our standard option for fish. So just an update on our data collection process. It's been going really well. We've already finished 7. We still need 13 because we have that total of 20 sites, 5 from each of our 4 strata. And so we're on schedule to finish by mid-December. The original goal was to finish by spring, but we have been prioritizing those high elevation sites in October to make sure we're not having to wait till May to access them due to snowfall, and because we might see ice storms or something that pushes back our data collection. So we may not finish by the end of December if there's any other thing that comes up, but right now it's looking good. So where are we going next? As I mentioned before, after we're done with our data collection, by probably February through May, we'll have the data to MHE and they can analyze it. Something that we've been doing is we're actively working with MHE as we notice things in the methods that need to be addressed for that larger scale study. An example of something we're already seeing out there in the field is our transects looping back on themselves when there is a high level of sinuosity in our streams. So we're taking notes on these things, letting MHE know, providing examples, and in doing so, we'll be able to address those before this large-scale study. Any questions before I move on to the next subject? All right, let's go on then. We're going on to our roads and steep slope pilot protocols. Just a reminder, if you want to bring it up, I sent out the protocols via email on both September 10th and I think it was September 30th. And you know, this part of our presentation, that my presentation is meant for discussion. So if you want to interrupt me at any point because you have a question or you have something you want to say about what you saw in those methods, please let me know. So just a bit of background on all the work that's been done to get to this point. A lot of it has been with you all, the committee. So we started on getting these roads and steep slopes pilot protocols ready in 2024 in September, so over a year ago. You all were sent rule selection documents. And then in October, the rule selection was discussed at a CMPC meeting. And then in October through December, the CMPC provided feedback on that rule selection. Then in 2025, in January through March, feedback was reviewed by ODF specialists. And then in April through June, the study was refined and discussed with Mount Hood Environmental. Then at our last July meeting, MHE presented draft protocols. And then in August, they further refined those protocols for what you're seeing now. And in September, and also sometime in October, I sent out the draft protocols to CMPC for review. All right, so just to get the conversation flowing, I just want to do a short overview of each of of the steep slopes pilot study. So I also wanted to shout out to Mark Rose and Mark Tepley from Mount Hood Environmental for the content of the steep slopes and roads pilot studies slides that I've included here. They may be familiar to some of you who have seen them presented, but again, this is something to review to start generating our discussion. So the steep slopes pilot study will be looking at designated debris flow transversal areas, or DDFTAs. The areas are identified by the slopes model as most likely to deliver debris flows to type F/SSBT streams, and FPA rules require tree retention proximate to those DDFTAs. For the general approach, we do a desktop review for written plan completion, and then that is followed by field evaluation for tree retention on a random sample of harvest units within those DDFTAs. Now, just a note that's here included here at the bottom as well is that there was some time spent looking at the efficacy of remote sensing methods, but there were concerns about canopy coverage and accurately identifying harvest in debris flows. All right, so just a little bit more information on how the sites are selected. The sites will be drawn from a sample of harvest activities from harvest notifications, and they will be stratified either by our standard or minimum option. The notifications and polygons will be reviewed for those DDFTAs, and then those DDFTAs will be targeted for field surveys. The entire length of the DDFTAs will be surveyed in the harvest unit for tree retention. So what would that look like? So just a reminder, minimum option is no harvest for 25 feet on either side of the draw for 50% of the DDFTA, which is on our right side, versus you see on the left side of this slide, the standard option is 25 feet on either side for the entire length of that DDFTA. So that's what we would be looking at as tree retention in those buffer areas. Oh, let's go back here. Okay, so given all that information and also what you've had a chance to look at, did anyone have any feedback that they'd like to give now about the pilot protocol for steep slopes? All right, you can always do a go. Oh, yes.
I have a question. I think I read that the retention doesn't have to be contiguous. I mean, that there can be breaks in it. Is there a minimum length though? Like,
you know, I'm not 100% sure on that. It doesn't have to be contiguous.
right.
Yeah, you're right about that. Adam, are you sure about I didn't see anything about a minimum length, but I may have missed it.
Yeah, I'm looking at what's in the protocol in terms of the section or subsection of the rule. I think for standard option, I'm not seeing anything that mentions contiguous, but I mean, it's all trees within 25 feet on either side.
Right.
For the SFO option, yeah, I'm not seeing anything specific there, whether it needs to be contiguous, but I think, you know, for this study design, we'll hone in on where the buffer exists. There is one. Yeah, we can dig into that a little bit. Check with our FPA experts, and but you know, if there's anyone here on the call that might know, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Stephen. That's a good question to have. Were there any other questions that you'd like us to address or comments before? Yes, Seth.
Okay. So I just had a question about your selection methods. And I may have missed this. Are you trying to get a statistically significant, or I mean, at this point, I guess it's a pilot, but are you trying to get both enough sites within both the minimum option and the standard option to be able to speak to both? Is what the goal is? I imagine that's true.
So my understanding is that, like you said, it is a pilot study. Probably, if it's anything like the riparian study, which I'll have to look again back at the protocol, but there's probably going to be an equal number selected for the standard option and minimum option so that we can practice those methods. Probably just enough to generally look at compliance. In a somewhat statistically significant way, but again, that won't be the goal of the study. So yeah, I'm guessing it'll probably be a similar thing. Let me just look. I did read this. It's just kind of hard to. It's such a large document that give me a moment. Um, there we go. Recommended minimum sample size is 20 harvest units per stratum. Um, Okay, so it looks like that'll probably be what we would go for, and that is statistically significant. So we're looking at 20 for the standard option and 20 for the minimum option.
Yeah, I think, Emily, just to piggyback off of that, I think that part of MHE's recommendation will inform the, I don't know if it's standard error, but it's some type of error estimate for the full study, so that they'll have a better idea of what the sample size should be for the full study, if that makes sense. So it's not just kind of out of the blue. It is a number that can help inform the statistical study design of the full study.
Yeah, and that's on, if you're curious, that is on page 11 of our steep slopes thing under sample size 4.1.3. And it does talk a little bit about that. I'm not a statistician, so I'm not great at articulating what they're saying. But if you want to see what MHE wrote, you can reference that.
So that's helpful. I would I mean, I guess it's just kind of a heads up. I'll be interested to see how many you actually get. I think this one will also, especially on the small forest landowner piece of it, will also be challenging to find enough sample size given the infrequency of this type of activity.
Yeah, that's a good point. It will be interesting to see how it plays out. Ken.
So, oh, I'll wait till after Ken. Go.
Things there. So my first question is on both this and then the riparian buffers, and to some degree even on the roads, when they're doing these samples, as they're collecting that data now in the riparian, how do they deal with a misclassification of the stream once they get to the site? Is that thrown out of the study and then a new site selected?
Yeah, so if, for example, there just isn't a stream where it looked like there was, that's something that's happened before based on looking at, from GIS perspective. So when that happens, if it's an inappropriate site, that can be thrown out. If it looks like there was no timber harvest at all, even though, it said there was, then we also throw it out. As far as stream classification goes, we're going off of whatever information is in the system. We don't go in there and determine whether or not it has fish in it. So that's something that we're referencing data that's already been determined by a model that we're not a part of creating. Does that answer your question?
A little bit, and maybe this second question, which is broader than just classification, but it's related. So when you encounter past practices on a stream that were under a different classification system because they've changed the classification map, and now you're having a new harvest in the same area or a new activity, then how do you account for that in if you take what you just said and say you're not doing classification, But in the past, that was classified differently. And and I encountered this especially in the lower slopes, the small forest landowner zones of the streams. It seems like the new maps have a lot of reverting back to some things that were changed in the last 2 years ago, that classification map. So there's been some significant changes in some areas, and in these landowners managed under that old regime, and now they're overlaying a new classification, and it may be right or it may be wrong. It may be, and classification is two ways. It's not just a dry site where it says there should be water. It's also a larger stream and a potentially a more fish bearing stream where it wasn't before, that is the reality on the ground. Um, or a misplaced stream, which I'm actually currently working on a property where the stream overlay is radically off by hundreds of feet uh, in the and so they managed to this awkward classification system. What the stewardship forester had to do was go back to an old map and insert it in the ferns documentation and say, we're going to do, this is our standard that we're going to regulate off of. Because I
Yeah.
think even he was worried about getting in trouble because it was so
Yeah.
radical a change.
So something that we do to make sure we're going to places that actually have streams is we do look at satellite data, not just a layer of streams before we go out. So that's part of that. Also, what we've grabbed for the riparian pilot study is only things done in 2024. So I'm pretty sure, like you said, within the last 2 years, things have changed. Well, it should be the same in the last year. So I don't think we're going to be running into those large changes in what those streams are classified as based on what you were talking about. Adam, is there anything you want to crack at this?
Yeah, I mean, I had the same thought as that these were selected from 24. I don't know if there's been major classification changes since then. I mean, looking ahead with the stream flow, permanence, perenniality, that modeling work, that'll be completed next year. And when we come back to the riparian pilot study, I don't think that'll be an issue, but I think, Ken, you bring up a good point in that just to be cognizant of kind of some of the potential changes that have happened with stream classification. And I believe we do a pretty thorough job of, like Emily said, the imagery and I think getting into more of the details of the site. But yeah, appreciate the comment there, Ken.
Okay, so the part that relates to steep slopes, if past practices say we now have this standard option or minimum option, and they had harvested in 2024, and then they harvested the other side in 2025 or whatever, and they were picking these sites out. How are they accounting for past practices and the difference in age, which may not meet the minimum standards for size on one side of the stream versus the other?
Rebecca, you want to take a crack at this?
And as far as I know, when we're going through, especially with the pilot, when we're going through the site selection process, we make sure it was the previous year, so it was during the time frame of the new rules going into effect, and then we are looking for for anomalies like that, and they would get tossed if they don't fit what we should be expecting, like for the new rules. I know John did that for the riparian pilot study. So again, any sort of weird anomalies like that would be taken out for the pilot study, and of course for the full study. He goes through a really extensive process of weeding out those that wouldn't be applicable.
Yeah, and again, that's why we have that sample overdraw, in addition to making sure we can contact all of the landowners. That's in case there are some sites that are just not suitable, and we have thrown some out based on talking to landowners, and looking at when things were, the notifications were put through, being like, oh, actually, that's 2023, not 2024. Check with Stewardship Forester. Okay, that's not suitable. We're throwing that out. We're going down to the next site on the list. And does that answer your question, Ken? Can I talk to Seth? He's had his hand up for a bit, so I just want to check in.
Yeah, I'm done.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Seth.
So, yeah, I just wanted to, and this is just more of a comment, something to keep in mind as you think about the protocols. The reality of these sites, they're very steep. Some of them are rocky, right? Or have some rocky outcrops or exposed soils because they're steep sites, and some of them have small slumps and that sort of thing that have occurred over the years in them. So as a result, many of these within 25 feet next to the stream don't have a lot of trees. And so my question, or maybe it's not really a question, it's just a heads up for thinking about how you deal with this in the protocol for sampling. The buffer doesn't require that we that landowners stand up trees in those areas, right? So you just have to leave what's there, right? And so it just a sort of heads up in terms of how you're measuring where a buffer is and where a buffer isn't if you go along a fairly large stretch that doesn't have any stumps or anything, but it might not also have any trees, right? So that's more of a comment than it is a question, just a heads up for how you're designing that protocol as you're going out sampling.
Yeah, and that's accounted for. Actually, if you look on page 6 of the protocol, it does talk about stumps when looking for a tree retention. Even if there aren't trees, if there's no stumps, then that's considered to be an area where the trees were retained. So that's definitely being taken into consideration during when MHE put the protocol together. All right, any other questions before we move on to our roads? All right, well, thank you all for your comments and your questions. Appreciate it. All right, so going into our roads pilot study overview, many of the Division 625 rules that we looked at when we were all selecting the rules they included fuzzy or qualitative language like minimize or as necessary, or they were rules that would require an engineering level analysis to verify. Additionally, the concept of critical locations was a sticking point that we ran into. It's really important for both compliance monitoring and the future habitat conservation plan to look at these critical locations, but it's hard to measure in a yes or no way. So just, a heads up that we ultimately decided to track how often those roads are built in critical locations instead of trying to evaluate compliance with the rules that are dealing with the critical locations. The frequency is a neutral idea. So, just wanted to get that out there before I even go over the overview that these are some things that we all wrestled with in the past. So yeah, this roads pilot study, it's looking at new and reconstructed water crossings, obtaining a comprehensive perspective on water crossing implementation that starts with a desktop review of written plans for completion, and then followed by conducting field surveys to evaluate rule applications for a range of water crossing rules. And then the second part of that, which I talked about just before, was looking at new and reconstructed roads and looking at written plans to calculate the frequency that road construction and reconstruction crosses those critical locations. Again, frequency, not compliance, and frequency is considered neutral. It's just good information to have. All right, so a little bit more about how we're going to be approaching these. For the water crossings, we're going to be drawing a sample of new and reconstructed stream crossings from ferns, stratifying that sample to fish and non-fish streams. And there's going to be an equal number of sites across those strata. And then we're going to be conducting field surveys at those water crossing locations. For the roads in critical locations, the frequency, we're drawing a sample from all new and reconstructed roads, and then doing a desktop review of written plans. So specifically with the water crossings, we are going to be accessing the water crossings and conducting field measurements and general measurements that look at our culverts, our bridges, and then the stream and stream bank. So I included here just the different things that we're going to be looking at for those 3 types of crossings, the different measurements we'll be taking, and then we will be taking photos to also accompany those measurements. So I'll give you a moment to look at what we'll be observing. I just didn't want to read out the list to you all. All right, so given that, I'm breaking up the feedback to for this protocol to us talking about the water crossings first, then the critical locations. Are there any questions or comments dealing with the water crossings part of our field methods?
Are you, and I'm sorry, I don't have access right now to what you sent out. For these, and the reason why I ask is because I know there is an allowance in the rule for parent material. If the engineer that designed the project deems that there's enough material above, there's an allowance for, I can't remember how many field seasons it was, but 1 or 2 field seasons or something like that to fill in with natural material from above. So just curious if that was accounted for in the protocol and the timing.
Yeah, let me look at that.
I can chime in for a quick second. That is when we had okay. I cannot think of his name right now. Our road forest specialist, Greg Erb, he actually flagged that and said that that would be something that we would need to take into consideration. So yeah, that is definitely highlighted and flagged.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that. I don't think I was there for that conversation, so get it. All right, if there aren't any other questions or comments, we'll move on to our critical locations. All right, so again, we'd be assessing the frequency of roads in critical locations of our new and reconstructed roads. You know, something we're keeping in mind and why we consider this neutral is that, you know, when people are putting in these roads, they are considering several things, you know, the landscape, existing roads, legal boundaries. An example is a road crossing in a critical location may be avoiding a different type of critical location. So, you know, when we're looking at this, we're taking and keeping in mind that this is a neutral thing, but it's good to have the information. Thoughts?
Hey, Emily, this is
So,
Josh at DEQ. Um, on the critical locations, those are supposed to be reviewed or have a review opportunity by DEQ and ODFW. So on the DEQ side, I was getting a lot of questions from our basin coordinators, so I, kind of set up a template and for reviewing and commenting on these as part of the critical road locations. Is it going to be purely like the field methods, or are kind of the planning and process sides going to be checked as well? Like to see, are our stewardship foresters reaching out to DEQ and ODFW? Are the plans from landowners or operators sufficient? And are DEQ and ODFW actually responding to requests from stewardship foresters?
Yeah, so I don't think that's something that we are looking into. Oh, yes, Stephen.
Oh, if you finish that last one, I was just
Oh,
going to
okay.
ask about, yeah, I got a different question.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you had a comment on that. Okay. Anyway, my understanding is that really it's just looking at how often we're getting roads in critical locations and not the process going into it is my understanding. But Rebecca probably has a better idea. She had more of a hand in this. Rebecca.
Well, it is a pilot, so we will be adjusting as we go. But that it, there will be a desk audit component, or not audit, but a desk review. So we will be looking at the written plan, the NOAP, all the attachments. And so, as we go through the process, we could gather information. But again, at this time, it's just the frequency. And so if there was information, it might be just for internal review and not um, for for the final study. But again, it is a pilot, so we'll be looking at ways to make it thorough and efficient.
All right, thanks.
All right, Stephen.
On the noting the frequency, which I like that idea, are you also going to note just the length or the distance that road is within the critical location? So like, you have, a certain number of frequency, but is it 50 feet? Are they 200 feet? Just to gather that type of information.
Rebecca.
As far as I know right now in the pilot, there wouldn't be a field verification for the critical locations. I'd have to double check, but I believe it's just more of the desk review for the pilot. Because you know how a written plan may say a certain number, but it may be different when you go out there, slightly different. So unless it's stated in the comments from the stewardship forester or in the written plan or in the completed notification information provided. But that's a good question, and I'll follow up with MHE on that.
Thank you, Rebecca. Does that answer your question? All right. Seth.
yeah, I would underscore what Josh mentioned. I think this is an opportunity to check the process as well. And so whether or not that becomes a formal part of the pilot and the reporting, I do think it would behoove the agency to look at the process. And one of the outcomes of this program is hopefully improvements in process, as well as anything else that might come out of it. So I just wanted to underscore that. And then in terms of and in terms of the distances, I like the comment that Steve made as well. I think that that's material in talking about the frequency, because frequency is both number of times, but then also amount of occurrences, right? And that's different if it's 10 feet versus 1,000 feet, right? Is that an N of 1, or does that get calculated for the actual potential for impact sort of thing? So something to be able to quantify potential for impact, I think, would be useful there. And then I just a question about well, no, I think those were just the two things that I wanted to chime in on. So everything else has been talked about, so I'll stop.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys have had some really insightful questions and comments. Is there anything else anyone would like to address or have questions about? All right, I'll move on. And, if anybody has any questions or comments that they want to go back to later on, just let me know, because that's why we're here. All right. So just, something to make you all aware, MHE would like written feedback by November 6th. So please send me your written feedback on these protocols by then. What was talked about today, I took some notes on that. We also have the recording of the meeting, so that will already be included. But if you want to expand upon it, or you have anything else that you would like to discuss with myself or Adam or Rebecca, let us know by November 6th. Also, I don't know if you guys were noticing. Oh, yes, Adam.
Yeah, Emily, I had one go back around the critical locations, and I just noticed this. So right now in the protocol for road location, critical locations, we have, it's section, if you look in the rule, it's section 3 and section 5 listed as the rules that we're monitoring. Section 4 is the piece that includes review by DEQ and ODFW. So I think for those that provide, like Josh and others that feel that should be in there, please include that in written. I think it'd be helpful to include that in the written comments. Or I think just mentioning it here, we can reevaluate that and talk with MHE. But that's the kind of feedback that I think we're definitely looking for. But I just wanted to clarify that which sections are in the protocol now and which ones aren't.
Thanks, Adam. But yeah, so November 6th, but yeah, you can talk to us. You can write written comments. I mean, written is nice because then MHE can directly look at that. But yeah, something I just wanted to point out, which is kind of lighthearted, is that we've been having a lot of beautiful things that we're seeing out in the field during the riparian study. Oh, yes, Rebecca.
I just wanted to another go back. I did reach out to Camille, our geotech, about the steep slopes and regarding the question of the DDFTs and the continuous. And she said there is no minimum as long as the total, and I believe this was for small forest landowners, the total, as long as that equals 50%, then it's good.
Awesome.
There is
Thank you,
no
Rebecca.
minimum length. Okay. Sorry.
No,
Didn't
no,
mean to interrupt your.
Oh, no, I was just going to give credit to you and Sarah for taking some wonderful field photos. I forgot to highlight the cool one in our agenda that was taken by Sarah, but yeah, it's gorgeous out right now, and it's a good time. So just wanted to say something about that, more of a lighthearted note, but it's been cool seeing the photos that people are taking out there. So I wanted to show that. All right. So I guess we kind of already had our questions and comments, but if you have any more go backs, I'll just take one more pause before heading on to the next thing. All right. So now getting into our compliance monitoring symposium. That was last week, the Tuesday through Thursday. I can't believe it was so recent. We had 3 different states participating. It would have been 4, but Alaska was unable to make it due to an interstate travel ban, which was kind of sad. We also had Mark Rose from MHE was there for both of our classroom days during the presentations, and he said that he learned a lot from being there and looking at what other states are doing. And Seth Barnes presented on that first day in the morning to represent what the Compliance Monitoring Program Committee is doing. So other states got to hear a bit about what the work you all do. So yeah, again, we had 3 states participating. We had the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE, Forest Practices Program. Then we had the Idaho Department of Lands, Forest Practices and Stewardship. And then the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, Forest Practices Compliance Monitoring Program. So I just wanted to go over a bit of the takeaways that we had from the symposium. And also I will be sharing with you all the different presentations that were there and some of the notes. If you're interested in it, I did get permission from those who were presenting to distribute to our CMPC. But just wanted to highlight some things. So overall, there was a similar compliance rate kind of general trend where industrial landowners did have higher than non-industrial compliance rates. So for all 3 of those states, generally compliance overall was high, usually above 90%, which is similar to what we saw in our reforestation study, which was around 90. So it's heartening to hear that there were some similar good things going on. For our monitoring approaches, there were some differences, but I'll go over that in a second. But something that I found really interesting was the way they interfaced with their landowners. Something that WDNR had that I wish we had is they have area liaisons that it's their job to reach out to landowners for the compliance monitoring efforts. And they can either do that directly or they can do it through working with their stewardship foresters. So that was a really interesting thing that they had designated positions for that. And then for IDL, they required their stewardship foresters' involvement in reaching out to landowners. So, with us, it's more of a, hey, like, could you help us? Which, is great, but theirs was actually required. So I thought that was interesting. And then for CAL FIRE, it's a bit more like what we have where it's up to the field crews. So it's up to us to reach out to our stewardship foresters. For them, it's up to them to reach out to licensed foresters that operated on the landowner's land, who then interface with the landowners. So they don't actually have stewardship foresters in California. They have licensed foresters that have to take like a big test and everything to be considered to have that license. So that was pretty interesting to see. Something that was true across all of the states is they did have the ability to access the land and serve a warrant, but they avoided that. So that is something that, we may want to keep in mind going forward. For these differences and monitoring approaches for each state, it was cool because they were really very different. So just to give perspective on that, IDL had like a 20-page guide for all of their rules. It was hundreds of pages for CAL FIRE, like more than us. And then WDNR, their forest practices rules were similar in size to ours. It was cool because they all brought out printed copies, and just like seeing that definitely affected how they approach their monitoring, because with IDL, they're able to, every 4 years, they would work with their DAQ and their State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection and their Geological Survey and Water Quality Control Boards. And they would monitor things like they have exemption and emergency notice monitoring. So those were something that people put out. And then they would also look at things that were regulatory or public concerns. So they didn't have a rigid schedule or a specific set of rules they were looking at. It was really as things came up. And that makes sense with how many rules they have. For IDL, every 4 years, they had a large scale compliance audit with their DEQ being there for it. They looked at compliance with all the rules at play on randomly selected sites. And again, I guess, yeah, the rule book is only 30 pages, so they're able to look at all of the rules, and they do a visual assessment when they do those. And then for WDNR, it was interesting because when they look at compliance, they would use a field team from varying agencies to assess all applicable rules at each randomly selected site. And by applicable rules, I mean they have specific ones they focus on, kind of like how we're going to be going forward with our riparian steep slopes and our roads rules. But they look at all of the highlighted rules at a site that's at play. And their teams consist of forest practices staff, an ecologist, a WDFW biologist, and a tribal biologist. So again, all of these monitoring approaches are very different. Theirs is yearly for WDNR, and again, like Cal Fire is as needed, and Idaho is every 4 years. So really interesting. Any questions about what we were seeing during the symposium? Rebecca.
Sorry.
No,
so,
this is great.
So it's not so much a question, but the interesting thing that kind of came out of it is, and this is something Seth Barnes had brought up when he presented, is the number of notifications and the level of forestry activity that occurs in Oregon is significantly higher than what occurs in Idaho and Washington. And so that when they were talking about the stewardship involvement and communication, it sounded like with Idaho, they had their stewardship foresters could handle actually interacting with every operation, like connecting with those. Where in Oregon we have so many that you could just the volume of activities, you could tell that it impacted how we each have designed our compliance monitoring programs. And then with Washington, they have the whole application process, so they have eyes on that application just from the get-go, like going back and forth. So again, very different. In some ways it was hard to compare, but very interesting to learn all the components. The other thing about the avoidance of warrants is it was mainly because of safety. They said if there was any sort of safety issue, they tried to avoid the warrant pursuit. They just stayed away. They weren't going to put their staff at risk.
And they didn't seem to have as much of an issue with non-response. It was mostly, just going off of what Rebecca was saying, it was mostly either, hey, get off my land and it's a safety issue, or, okay, you can come on, So it was more binary, it seemed, across the board. So we have kind of an interesting thing going on. Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I think you covered the main takeaways really well. And I just wanted to say thank you to Starker Forest and OSU for the field trip and presentations there, and thanks Seth for presenting. Emily did a fantastic job planning this, so kudos to Emily, and thanks David Showalter for presenting. Overall, I was pretty pleased with the conversation. And I feel like we were kind of just scratching the surface in a lot of ways. And this was just sort of the start of the conversation of understanding different programs, the policy framework that kind of, is crucial to how the programs are implemented. And then I guess, one thing we did discuss was, and sorry, Emily, if you're going to mention this, but I think there's some future potential for future meetings ahead. The other thing we discussed for products, I think, was just an initial crosswalk. There was so many, so much terminology that I think we're like, well, that's called this here, and this is called, our stewardship foresters are called this. And so like, I felt like that was a theme that if we're going to have future conversations of just a kind of a almost dictionary of terms that crosswalk different programs and from organizational things to concepts in the forest practices rules. So anyway, those were just a few additional thoughts. But thanks to everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and this photo here is actually of Jennifer Beath from Starker Forests, just pointing out some of, I think she's pointing out at a riparian buffer that's kind of off there, but it was really cool getting to see some of our forest practices in the field, besides when we're surveying from both OSU and Starker. And yeah, it was really great, and those folks helped me out so much. So I really appreciated Jennifer, and then for OSU there was Mark Swanson and Brent Klumpf, and they did a really good job with all of that. So I also wanted to give them a shout out. But yeah, just for what the future looks like for our compliance monitoring program symposium. The representatives from the other states are really excited about continuing this. WDNR actually they actually were like, you know what, we'd like to do this perhaps next year and be the host. So, that's something that I'll be following up with in a week or two. And, there's the possibility for involvement of more states in the future. We're hoping to expand the geography so we can learn more from more programs. Again, like we could have had Alaska, but they had that interstate travel ban. I also had some interest from Arizona, but they just didn't have quite enough time to get things together. But, there was a general consensus that this was a really valuable learning opportunity across our programs. So I was really happy with how it turned out. I don't think it could have turned out better, because people being excited enough to say, hey, let's do this again was pretty great. So I was happy about that. Any questions about the symposium that is not already voiced? All right, we'll move on then. Okay, so we've tentatively scheduled the upcoming 2026 CMPC meetings. I sent out the invites for those. I just wanted you all to take a moment to look at those. They're during the same time, 9 to 10:30. It's the last Thursday of each of those quarters, like it was this year. If there's any specific date that any of you all know you just can't make, we could do a doodle poll or something and reassess. Is there anything anyone wants to say about any one date now? You can, or you can email us later too. Okay, but also, I would love to get some feedback on coming meetings. Again, you can discuss it here or later with Adam or myself. I know that Seth Barnes mentioned an idea during the symposium that, going on a field trip could be something valuable for us all to do together. So that's a possibility that I wanted to highlight. Stephen.
Yeah, I think that would be great. It would have been really interesting to tag along in the symposium field tours.
well, that might be Washington, but
yeah.
But I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Stephen. And I'm sure we can have something else that has to do with some of those maybe we could do something that's has to do with some of our pilot studies coming up, to show like how we're doing those methods in the field. Like, I think that could also be something beneficial for you all, so you can ask questions. Maybe even like maybe as like even a, I don't know, like Adam, this is something I'm just throwing out here, so I don't know. But maybe even like as something like maybe you guys hang out for part of a training session we have on pilot study methods and see what we're, running into. Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial, at least for me. I mean, in going through the protocols here, I mean, there is a lot there. And I just trying to imagine myself doing those measurements, or how do you do them? And it would just be helpful for me anyway, and just so that maybe we can be better at analyzing, maybe being more knowledgeable about and being able to offer additional advice as appropriate. So
Okay, yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I think, personally, I'm one of those people that I can read a protocol forever, but until I actually go out and do the measurements, I can't wrap my head around it fully. So it makes sense that others can feel the same way. All right.
Yeah,
Oh,
I like the
yeah.
idea. Sorry, Emily. I think your idea of extending the invitation to the committee. I think we typically will probably do that type of field training in like September ballpark. And so maybe we could extend the invitation there as we kind of work through some of the details of the protocol.
All right, great. Unless anyone has any other things they want to address now, I will move on to what we're going to be, just give a preview of what our next meeting will look like. All right. Okay, so next meeting, January 29th, again, we'll be doing another riparian pilot update. Probably by that time, we'll be finished with our field work. So that may be interesting to hear about, and, hear about what we ran into that may be something MHE addresses, something like that, and then there'll be an update based on you all's feedback on the roads and steep slopes methods. Then that story map that Elise Chiba has been working on, there'll be an update on the progress on that. And then we'll also be doing a review of the charter, since it will be, it's the beginning of the next year. And yeah, a reminder, we do, by next week, November 6th, we would love to have your written feedback on those two pilot protocols. So just wanted to bring that back around. I guess any questions before, or go backs before we wrap up for today? Rebecca.
So just a comment, I'm like super grateful that we're going through the pilot process, given just over the last few weeks, just like Stephen mentioned, we're running into all these different scenarios and trying to figure out how do we deal with this scenario. Like yesterday, I think both crews that were out experienced a lot of blowdown that happened this last weekend, and like how do we handle that in terms of trees that are marked as boundary are now uprooted, and so it's a really, really valuable experience that we're all going through, and we have lots of questions for MHE and just how we streamline some of these very frequent differences, reality, I guess you could call it. So.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions or comments, I just wanted to thank you all for being here. Your feedback is really valuable to our program. And this has been really interesting, hearing what people have to say about, future meetings, our pilot protocols, just like symposium. It's I've really enjoyed this. So thank you all for being here and providing your valuable feedback. And with that, I'll wrap up. Guys, have a great rest of your week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Emily.